There's a phrase in English that sounds a bit academic, but it describes something very human and very common. It's called a perverse incentive. A perverse incentive is what happens when you try to fix a problem, and accidentally create the perfect conditions for that problem to grow instead. This idea connects directly to something known as Goodhart's law, which is often summed up like this: when a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. In other words, the second you start judging success only by one number, people will game that number, even if it destroys everything else. And history is full of examples where this went badly wrong. First up, the famous Cobra effect. Back when the British ruled India, in Delhi around the late 1800s, there were venomous cobras everywhere, scaring everybody. The government said, "Hey, we'll pay a bounty for every dead cobra you bring us, we'll check the skin or the head." At first, it worked great, people turned in piles of snakes. But pretty soon, clever locals started breeding cobras on little farms just to kill them and cash in. When the officials caught on and cancelled the whole program, those breeders let all their now worthless snakes loose. Boom, way more cobras than before. The city ended up worse off than when they started. A lot of people tell this story, and some historians argue it might be a legend, but even if the details are fuzzy, the lesson is crystal clear. A very similar thing happened in Hanoi, Vietnam, in 1902, when the French were in charge. The city had a huge rat problem, rats spreading bubonic plague through the sewers. The colonial government offered a bounty, 1 cent for every rat tail you turned in. They figured tails were easier than whole dead rats. Professional hunters got hired, but regular folks jumped in too. Before long, people spotted rats running around with no tails. Turns out, folks were catching rats, chopping off the tails, letting the rats go so they could breed more, and some even started rat farms for a never-ending supply. In 1 month alone, over 55,000 tails got turned in, but the rat population exploded. This one's super well documented by historians, and some even call it the rat effect, because it's more solid than the cobra story. The mistake? Using just a tail as proof created a perfect reason to keep rats alive and multiplying. Fast forward to the 1800s in China. Paleontologists from the West were paying local peasants for every piece of dinosaur bone or fossil they brought in. The goal was to speed up discoveries. But the peasants wanted to maximize their money, so when they found a beautiful complete skeleton, they'd smash it into dozens of little fragments. More pieces meant more cash. Same thing happened in Indonesia in 1937, locals got paid per bone fragment, so they deliberately broke stuff. Priceless scientific treasures got ruined just to juice the numbers. Something heartbreakingly similar happened with the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1946 and 1947, Bedouin shepherds found these incredible ancient manuscripts in caves near the Dead Sea, texts over 2,000 years old. One scroll got accidentally torn in half while they were handling it. But once word got out how valuable they were, prices shot up. The Bedouins realized they could make way more money by breaking the scrolls into smaller pieces and selling them separately. Scholars later had a nightmare trying to piece everything back together. Again, paying by the fragment turned careful preservation into deliberate destruction. Now let's jump to the Soviet Union. Their whole economy was run by central planners who set strict production quotas for factories. There were tons of messed up incentives there. We could talk for an hour, but here's one classic. One nail factory got judged by the total weight of nails they produced. So what did they do? They made gigantic, super heavy nails that nobody could actually use, just to hit the tonnage fast. When the planners got wise and switched the target to the number of nails, the factory started churning out millions of tiny, useless pins. Quality? Who cares? Usability? Not on the scorecard. Closer to home, in the United States during the 1860s, while building the Transcontinental Railroad. The government gave the Union Pacific Railroad huge subsidies, cash bonds and land, based on how many miles of track they laid. Flat land paid $16,000 a mile, mountains paid more. In Nebraska, near Omaha, the engineers took a perfectly straight route that had already been approved, and then scrapped it. Instead, they built this ridiculous looping detour called the Oxbow Route, 9 extra miles of track that curved around hills for no real reason, like a giant oxbow in a river. It didn't make the railroad faster or better, it just added miles so they could pocket hundreds of thousands in extra government money. Pure waste, driven by pay per mile. But if that was mostly greed, the next one was tragedy. Robert McNamara, the U.S. Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, came from Ford Motor Company where he loved numbers and spreadsheets. He tried to run the war the same way, everything measured, everything quantified. When one general told him his formulas were missing the feelings and the will of the Vietnamese people, McNamara wrote it down, looked at it, and erased it. If you can't measure it, he said, it doesn't matter. The main number everyone chased was body count, how many enemy soldiers we thought we'd killed. That became the report card for progress. Officers in the field started inflating numbers, counting dead civilians as enemies, making up kills, pushing risky attacks that turned locals against us. Headquarters tracked over 180 different metrics, but body count ruled everything. It created a fake picture of winning in Washington while we were losing hearts and lives on the ground. The war dragged on, cost over 58,000 American lives, and ended in defeat, all partly because we rewarded the wrong thing. More modern stuff? Look at Wells Fargo in the 2010s. The bank pushed crazy sales goals, 8 is great, meaning 8 products per customer, and tied bonuses and even keeping your job to hitting those numbers. Employees got desperate. Over 5,300 of them created more than 2 million fake accounts, opening checking accounts, credit cards, moving money around without customers knowing. The bank got hit with a $185 million fine, and top executives had to give back millions in bonuses. Unrealistic targets turned honest workers into fraudsters and trashed the bank's reputation. Another recent one, a United Nations program under the Kyoto Protocol to fight climate change. They paid chemical plants in developing countries big money in carbon credits for destroying a superpotent greenhouse gas called HFC-23, which is a byproduct of making refrigerants. Destroying it was dirt cheap, less than 20 cents a ton, but the credits were worth up to $15 a ton. Guess what happened? Plants started making way more refrigerant than anyone needed, just to create more HFC-23, destroy it, and cash the credits. Overall emissions actually went up. By 2010, experts figured maybe 59% of the claimed reductions were fake. They finally fixed it by capping and phasing out those payments in 2013. There's even a sharp idea in science that warns us about this trap. It's called Newton's flaming laser sword, or Alder's razor, and it says, if you can't settle something with an experiment or measurement, it's not worth arguing about. Sounds tough and logical for physics, right? But a sociologist named Daniel Yankelevich pointed out how dangerous that mindset gets in real life. He described it as sliding down 4 steps. First, we only measure what's easy to measure. Second, we ignore whatever's hard to measure or needs human judgment. Third, we decide those hard-to-measure things aren't important anyway. And finally, we pretend they don't even exist. When we reach that last step, we're blind. We're staring at the world through a tiny keyhole made of numbers, while out in the full room, people are quietly breeding cobras, smashing priceless fossils, wasting billions, and losing wars. So what's the lesson in all this? Numbers are tools, not truths. Metrics are maps, not the territory. When we confuse the score with the game, we invite disaster. When we reward numbers instead of outcomes, we teach people how to cheat us, sometimes without even meaning to. Always ask yourself, what am I not measuring? What might people do to hit the target while missing the point? Because if we forget the human stuff, the quality, the feelings, the long-term consequences, we end up rewarding the exact opposite of what we wanted. Good intentions aren't enough. We have to design our rewards wisely, stay humble about what we can't easily count, and never let a single metric become our God. Thanks for listening.